Or is it just me? I'm ready for now. So we'll try to keep this lively if we can. We are talking today about responding to student work, using technology to respond to student work. There are more of us. Rick Fisher is in English, and as am I, and he and I teach many of the same classes, so it's interesting. It'll be interesting.
Sorry, I'm working on it, really.
How Christy plays with the lights. How we both approach responding to similar kinds of assignments. Trish Johnson is elementary and early childhood education, and so she's dealing with a very different kind of assignments and scenarios. And Kaiser Kaufman, we met this morning, is a librarian. So again, coming at student work in a slightly different way. So we're going to talk about our presentation. It's going to be split up into sort of 3 pieces. And we're going to kind of layer, talk in terms of layers of complexity. So we'll start by talking about just responding in text with written comments or color, or looking at various drafts of text. And then we'll add another layer that incorporates color and more visual cues that aren't just text-based. And then we'll start talking about audio and video and screen capture and broadcasting and so forth. And we'll be sort of passing it back and forth quite a bit. People will jump in and say, well, I do that too, and I do it like this. But I will start by talking about the way I use text for screen capture, if I can get there. And I will open up an example. I lost it. I really am. Alright, I don't use this version of Word, so it's really big, and I'm sorry. So my objective as a writing teacher is to, when I'm responding to my students, is to ask them a lot of questions, to prompt them and to probe them, and to push them into making critical decisions about their writing. I'm not there to be an editor. I don't think that I help them at all if I'm editing their work, because when they get out of my class, they're not going to have an editor. So I do a lot of, as I said, I ask a lot of questions, and I talk back to their writing a lot, as if we were having a conversation, which admittedly is pretty one-way. But I'm wanting them to imagine that they might answer me. Word has a couple of features that make responding to writing really very simple. One of them is the track changes feature, which I'm guessing many of you have seen, where you can actually go in to a document, make changes, edit it, and save those, and then send it back to the author, and the author sees those changes. The problem with that feature, in my perspective, is that students, it's so tempting to just say, oh, okay, I'll just accept all these changes, and never really have the opportunity to really think critically about them, try to decide what we're really asking, and so forth. But the other feature that I like a lot and I use a lot is this commenting feature. And so what I'll do is I'll highlight a section of text and I'll speak back to it. And typically, the comments are visible to the student like this, although sometimes there's an alternate view where there's just a list of comments that look like footnotes or endnotes, but they're correlated with a marker in the text. Now, what I do with this is that I tie this very closely to a grading rubric, and I use the two documents together. Oh, okay. Is that what I want? Yeah. So that I can give general feedback on the rubric, and then more specific feedback in the original text itself. And I'll frequently point back and forth between the rubric and the original document. So I'll say, for example, look, here's an example of what I'm talking about in this section of the rubric. Or I've given you a comment, a global comment in the rubric, and here's an example of it. Sometimes I'll use these little codes to cross-reference, and sometimes I don't. It just depends how much time I want to spend training my students. A couple of reasons that I use Word. One is that students, almost all now have it. I mean, everybody's got Word, and it's really easy. But another is that I keep a bank of comments for every assignment. And so, because I find that I write the same thing over and over and over again to students. I'll say, this is great, but I want you to develop it in this particular instance. And pretty soon, I'm writing the same comment over and over and over again, and then finally it dawned on me, just write the comment once, and then cut and paste it from that bank of comments. So I do that, and I can do that with just having multiple files open in Word, and it saves me, I think, a lot of time. It also helps me focus on, sort of remind myself, what are the things that I'm looking for when I start reading a new assignment? What are the kinds of things that I commented on in the past? What are the things that I valued in the past? And of course, I use those comments not just for as critical comments, but also to applaud things that I think are working really well. The other thing that I do, I still have this file open. Maybe not. Just supposed to close it. Oh, come on. So one more time. You can do it. I'm techie. You can tell, right? Is that I'll also just use color. And this is very limited. Rick is going to talk to you about using color in a much more pervasive way. But I use just a tiny hint of color to call my students' attention to the kind of thing that I might circle on a page if I were working with a tablet or something like that. Just to say, hey, look at this. I don't want to say, you're using the wrong verb form here because that other verb is like this, and so this verb should be like this. Because I want them to begin to be able to make those kinds of conclusions themselves and to be able to identify what's really happening. So I'll just plunk in a little bit of highlighting. And I think for now, unless there are questions.
So you have to train students to look for the more subtle things?
They pick up on those things pretty fast, but I typically, so if I'm teaching online, what I'll do is I do a lot of broadcasting. And one of my earliest podcasts talks about how to read comments. Yeah, and of course in the classroom I'll do something very similar. So I'll tell them, and I'll do this in both online and in the classroom. I have moved more and more and more to taking all of my assignments electronically. My handwriting is atrocious, and I will write something, and I'm a words person. So I write a comment, and then I go, so then I have to erase it, and then write it again. Or that, and then I wanted to put it, that sounds a little bit negative. I need to recast it, and pretty soon there's like no paper left because I've rubbed it off, or it's completely, it's all brown. And this is, it just obviates all of those kinds of problems. So, you know, knowing that, students may not read comics, at least I try to make them as readable as they can be, to sort of, you know, up the odds a little bit. Great. We're on the conference.
One of the things while I was getting set up that I'll mention is that, as I said, many of us use many of these techniques. So when we finish talking, we'll have hopefully have time for questions and answers, and we can talk about sort of the different ways that we're using along with similar strategies.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right. I'm Rick Fisher. I teach writing classes, as I've already said. I'm apparently like the lowest tech of the four that we're talking, or that are talking right now. In the sense that I'm using, like, all you have to do is know how to highlight a piece of text in Word to use this technique. Maybe I should talk a little bit about why I started doing this. I haven't used this all that much. I started using it last summer when I was teaching online, and then I found it useful enough that I started using it in my on-campus classroom as well. The reason that I'm using color is that I find that it allows students to recognize patterns more quickly. So that's the main reason I think that this is a useful technique. So I'm just going to talk about two ways that I'm using color right now. The first of those is to try to get students to recognize within specific pieces of text how they can make changes that will help the tone or the content of the writing. So this is a sample I use. I teach a cover letter and resume unit for a technical writing class. So here's a sample that a student might write initially, like, I'm good at communicating, have good time management skills, and work well with others. I can code this with some colors to help them recognize what's going on here, and then I can use a revision to show them ways that they might improve what they're doing. So what I find when students write cover letters is typically that they make really general statements that they know sound good, but they have no real depth to them. And so what I'm trying to do is push them into specific detail. So here, I created a little key for this so that you can see how this would work. So I just have 4 colors that I'm using. Yellow means that it's like acceptably positive tones. They're doing something to present themselves with like some effort at tone. You see a lot of that in the first one, and the second one, what I'm trying to do is actually replace some of those words with more effective positive tones, so that's getting at the tone stuff. And then I'm using this weird teal color to try to get them to see that a really vague claim has no specific detail, and the second one, almost half of what's highlighted is specific detail. And then the other part that's important is that they're matching that up in some way to the job that they're applying for. And again, you can see that there's a little bit more of that, and those are becoming more specific as well. If I were doing this in a class, I would actually have them bring in one paragraph of the cover letter that they drafted. I would pull a couple of those together, and I would use examples from student writing so that they can see this a little bit more. Another advantage that I find to this is that I think, I might be wrong about this, but I hope that it makes revision feel more manageable. And the other thing that I hope is that it helps students recognize that the writing is not just like ideas that are big chunks, but actually phrases that are little chunks. And if you can help them see that, you can help them revise at a smaller level. And so that's why I like this approach as well, so that they can actually start to see it's just a phrase that I'm inserting in this spot or this spot. And then I will have, if I was doing this in class, I would actually have them go through and apply this to one of their paragraphs and try to figure out where can I actually add in more specific details. So this is one of the examples of the way that I'm using color. The other example is in rubric. So I use rubrics like Meg's rubric. This is one I used last semester. I haven't talked to students about their response yet. I'm wondering if you got this back, what would your response be?
Wow.
It's a little bit freaky, probably. Well, one nice thing about my color coding is that it takes advantage of some really basic, like, stoplight color patterns that people are familiar with, right? So if they want to know if they're doing good, they can see that at a glance. If they want to know whether hell no, they can see that at a glance. And I tell them, like, my grid means, like, it's okay. I don't necessarily know what you're going to do about it. There are other places that you should start revision. So if you got this back with a document and you're supposed to revise the document, where do you start? I realize you can't necessarily read this and make it bigger.
With the red, make the red.
Yeah, and in this case, this is actually an assignment where students turn in a group report, and then they actually have to revise that, add some new components to that, and then turn in a revised version. So this is one of the reasons that I'm using this is because it really has to feed into the revision. And so I'm trying to make it easy for them to figure out what do I address first. I would hope that they realize that the design of the report is the first place that they should spend some time. Sorry, design. So, because that's the red, right? So this is a comment about, is the report cleanly designed? Can someone find their way around within the report? So that's the way that this is put together. The other thing I like about this is that it gets back out to a big level. So I use inline commenting like Meg does, but a lot of times what I find is if I only do that, then I have students fixing those things without necessarily thinking about the larger scale. What I like about this model is that it gets them back to the big issues they need to be thinking about, and then if I want to provide a little bit more specific information, I put that in a comment in the rubric. So if I want to point them to something specific that they should work on, I can do that in a comment here. So another of my goals here is to actually move them away from really localized, like fixing of problems, out to a larger understanding of how these things can be transferred out of this one specific assignment into other assignments they're working on. So, yeah.
And she said the hell no red. Was that actually when you would start?
Yeah, because this, they have to revise this. And so if there's a major problem, I would say that's where they, like, I'm trying to draw their attention to places where there are places where they really have to do some substantial revision. This is a lot of yellow. Others of my students had much less yellow, and so I set them up to understand that yellow can sometimes mean like 3 little places in the text where I've made some comments that need fixed, or it can mean like, hey, you just need to be thinking about this throughout the document and making some changes. I had, I would say, pretty good success with this last semester. I think students did respond really well, and I'll continue to use this model. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. The other that I wanted to show really quickly is the compare feature in Microsoft Word. I think I've got to open some documents to get there, so just a second. How many of you already know about the compare feature in Microsoft Word? Okay. So if you already know about it, I'm showing you the very most basic level, so you probably already know everything I'm going to talk about. This is something I learned about from a student of mine 3 semesters ago, and I was like, this is amazing. Why has no one ever shown me this? So I'm trying to remedy that. Compare allows you to take 2 documents, and Microsoft Word uses track changes to show you where those documents have differences. That's the most basic thing that's happening. So you go into, in this version of Microsoft Word, you go into the Review tab. Then you've got Compare. You want to compare the documents, not combine them, and then you choose the documents you want to compare. I think that this will work as we'll find out here in a moment. So you just choose the ones that you want to compare. Then you click on OK. And then it creates this, which looks like a giant mess, but it's actually not that bad once you figure out what's happening here. So this is the document that's showing the changes. This is the original document. This is the revised document. So that's the view that you're looking at. Right? What I like about this, again, is that I want to see that students are actually revising work, and this allows me to see where they're revising. And so I can scan through this really quickly and see what kind of changes students have made. Basically, in this case, I can see that they've added a table of contents. I can see that they've added an executive summary. This tells me that they moved some information that was later in the original document up to this spot. Most of the revision at this point is just addition. It's not actually making small sentence level changes. More that's just addition stuff here at this point. And then when we get into the main body of the report, what we see is that there are actually not many sentence level changes. Not much evidence of really small scale revision. So this would potentially worry me, except in this case, the original report was in pretty good shape. If I want to see spots where they actually have started to make smaller changes, I can see here they decided to make a change to the way they were presenting some of their information graphically. Here what I see, these little lines tell me if there's a change. In this case, I can look over here at the original and then the revised one and see that the only change we made was to take out the indenting. So that's what's happening throughout this entire section. When I get down to the analysis section is actually where I get to see some more sentence level revision. So that happens here. So now I can see how they're actually making smaller scale revisions to the document. So this is useful anytime you're assigning revision to students to allow you to see where they're actually doing that revision and what kind of changes they're making. So I just wanted to make you aware that that exists. I don't use it often, but it's really nice to know about it in those cases where you told a student to make a certain change and you're like, I can't tell if there's anything different here. It allows you to make those comparisons really quickly. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to, oh, sorry, or I will answer a question.
I think this is really good. Do you have the student to use the change that whatever, so that whatever they change will have that, or they will have to do a normal word that when it appears that will show automatically?
Yeah, so the question is basically about whether students have to use track changes in order for this to be useful. The answer to that is no. If you can take two documents that have no editing, like evidence in them, and Microsoft Word will automatically show where the changes have been made. Another way of doing the same thing is to hand back a revision and have them turn on track changes, and then submit that document as well. And that's another way to sort of get to the same place. Athena?
Rick, do you have to then save the original file to your computer and then wait for them to hand in the second edited version to be able to compare back and forth?
Right, so this works if I have collected the original version,
right,
and then I have another version come in. That's when I would use this. It would also be possible to ask them to resubmit the original version when they submit the second.
True. I'm just curious. And then the second thing, the color coding, does that take a lot of extra time?
So what I find is that it makes me a little bit more responsible to my own rubric, because it forces me to go through and actually notice what I've said I'm looking at and then to evaluate it in those categories. To be honest, I haven't used it consistently enough to get fast at it, but I think it has the potential to actually be a faster method for providing feedback that is good feedback and helps them figure out where to revise. It minimizes, like I said, the number of localized comments I'm making, which I think is to my benefit and to the students' benefit. Yeah,
Do you use the comments or on SMA2 on the writers who have changed comments? Do you save those for work that will be revised, and then when they turn into the final version, your comments are more local and doing it to me? Where you do it? Would you comment extensively even on this not much
The microphone isn't working. So I'll talk really loud. Oh, thank you. This microphone is working. I tell my students that we're accruing a set of skills and strategies throughout the course of the semester. So I comment fairly extensively even on final assignments. But what I do is I make drafts optional. And when I'm getting multiple drafts, then with subsequent drafts, I comment much less.
and I'm only getting one draft of an assignment, I'll comment a lot. And then I may go back to that assignment with subsequent assignments and say, look at what I said here. Yeah, that's right.
Rick, do you want to go ahead?
I think that I have the same basic approach as Meg. The color coding that I did on that rubric, I would not do on a final version of that because I just find it much less useful. But, and so in that case, I might have a few comments in line, and then probably I would spend most of my time on overall comment to explain to the yourself that might transfer out of that. So,
Do you declare or require certain font or size that the students use on physical paper?
Especially for the technical writing class, no. So generally, I leave that up to them. In terms of margins, in terms of spacing, I think that should be determined based on their audience and purpose. So sometimes I'll get documents like that where you see a lot of the stuff that's showing up and compared is just formatting, and that may be really appropriate for those kinds of documents. But it does make the job of actually identifying where the changes are being made a little bit more.
But I would say that, for technical writing particularly, that that's an important part of the journal choice that the student's making. And so I may comment on that. I may say, I'll say two things. One is I'll say, unless otherwise specified, you should use a standard font and format. And with each assignment, there's some kind of presentation expectation of the student. And that's a big part of the assignment. But frequently, more and more frequently, all the time, in fact, I'll say, your audience can't read 8-point font. I can't read it, and your audience may be as old as me. So that's something you need to take into consideration, and that's part of my evaluation. You're cramming too much on the page. That inhibits the readability of the text. Yeah.
Are there other questions for those two, or should I move on?
Sort of.
Ask. Go ahead.
Our students sometimes students require a specific kind of background to enhance readability and use. Would you allow them to do that, and then maybe in final versions rip that out, or because there's technology related to transparency that you lay over writing. Is that?
I'd say what I would say about that is that I would always accommodate that the needs associated with disability, and to a certain extent, I accommodate needs associated with personal quirks, as long as they are considering the audience first and foremost. If a student needs to do certainly, for example, create things in a huge font, that's fine. The technology allows us to change that for a final draft.
All right, I'm going to get going. I think I might be a little bit briefer since I use a lot of the same approaches that the rest of the panel does. I'm just going to focus on one that I do that the other folks don't, which is I've been experimenting with using my iPad to make handwritten comments on electronic documents for my online students. So last summer was the last time that I taught Library 3010, which is a fully online information literacy course. It's a credit course. And it's capped at 30, so I don't have a ton of students. And they don't do as much writing as they might do in an upper division writing class, for example. It's a class on research. And so I'll show you an example of a draft. This is a third draft. I allow my students to provide lots of drafts and get comments if they want. So there aren't as many comments on this draft as there might have been. Where is it? There it is. So what I do is I take the student's Word document, save it as a PDF, throw it in my Dropbox, then I open it up on Dropbox on my iPad, and then pull it into another app that's called Notability. which allows me to handwrite, like I would on a paper copy, which is much more my style. I like to write on paper, and this eliminates some of what Meg was talking about, which is wanting to wordsmith and erase, and because it doesn't show. You can erase and rewrite as many times as you want, and it doesn't wear away the digital paper. So this is a 2-page assignment where I'm asking a student to do a lifelong learning sort of career research exercise, talking about their dream job, the kind of research that they would have to do. Yes?
What was the app again? The app that you used to do that?
Oh, Notability. There are several PDF markup apps, so it doesn't actually matter which one you use. iAnnotate is another one. Maria had one that I hadn't heard of. It's like Notate or something, I can't remember. Yeah, NEU Annotate. So there are lots of these, and basically it's just anything that will allow you to write on top of a PDF image file. So the students have to talk about their research needs on the job and what kinds of resources they would consume. So this is a very short assignment, but I really want them, like Megan and Rick said, to be specific, and that's what I have a really hard time getting students to do. So there's a rubric associated with this, so when I underline something, that's something that was on the rubric. They're supposed to be finding this. So I use my finger, or I use this stylus. It's very easy. And this was last summer when I was not as good as the stylus, so my handwriting is kind of horrible, but that's how it is. So I was underlining here and writing on the associated rubric. Yes, she is identifying the kinds of information that she will have to find and use on the job. And here I write, she made good specific examples of her information needs. Down here, though, I don't even remember if this was a man or woman actually, is not being specific. So I have a comment here that I need more specific resources here. I can circle. This is much more natural to me than using inline commenting. I also hate Microsoft Word, so this is just a personal problem that I have, and I would much rather write on top of an image file. I can save this comment, and I can also add additional pages, and then you can see I'm just kind of knowing what you were doing in grade paper, and I can write a comment at the end. So I could add additional space in order to make comments. These apps also allow you to type comments in on the iPad, so if you really wanted to do that, you could as well. And I find it's nice to just carry that around with me, just throw everything in my Dropbox, put the iPad in my purse, and go to a coffee shop and not have to have a full laptop. So I can show you how I do it if you want. Yeah. We hope. Yes, here's the iPad. So the resolution is kind of messed up. So basically, I would already have put my documents into my Dropbox. So if you don't have a Dropbox account, it's a free online option. You can actually, what we are using to share our documents for this presentation is Dropbox. So it's an online option also. But there's an app. I believe there's an Android app. Are there Android users out there? Yeah. So I've already opened my Dropbox, and basically what you have to do is make sure you're connected and get it to download. So you can see everything that's not grayed out is downloaded already. So I just need to make sure that's downloaded. So then I close that, and I just open up Notability. Where are you?
That first page. Right next to Dropbox.
I usually use it like this. So they reorder when you're facing the other way. So this app allows me to put things in folders if I want, and this little arrow in I don't want to explore it. There we go, arrow in. I click that, and then it asks me where I want to pull something in from to allow me to write on it. So I can go, okay, I want to pull something in from my Dropbox, and then I find it. And now you see that I write meetings kill me on a folder here. And so I could pull in anything, like an agenda of a meeting or whatever I want to write, create a note. Yep, and then I'm pulling that in here. And this is it only works with PDF or image files. It doesn't work with a doc file. So you have to change that into a PDF. And then I'm free to type. It's defaulted to text. I can click the pen. I can start crossing things out. I can erase. So it's pretty easy. If you taught 200 students, you probably would want to take the time to save 200 PDFs and then put them in your Dropbox. But it works for me with my relatively small classes and not that much writing.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, but Word now, the PDF is now open source, or I guess it's not open source, but it's
A web standard.
It's a web standard. It's integrated into Word. So if you wanted to do this, you could package these save the files as PDFs and submit them as PDFs in the first place.
Would you
And then
save
you would
as
have-
under Word?
Excuse me?
Would you save as?
It would be a save as.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've used this, I edited a book recently, and I had a major issue with one of my authors didn't do his footnotes correctly, and something happened when it went to the printer, and then they'd already formatted it, and they sent it back to me, and then I was able to, actually not on the iPad, but I was able to use PDF markup on my computer. So you can do this if you have the right PDF reader that also allows you to annotate your PDFs. You can actually do this on the computer, insert comments like you would in Word, circle things, that kind of thing. So it is really nice to be able to take an image file. Of course, I didn't want to submit a new doc file to the publisher who'd already done all the layout. I could just write on top of it where the different footnote numbers needed to be. And so that was a really big time saver. So you might find other applications rather than just teaching. I do this with my articles that I download from the library that I want to write on and I'm taking notes on. So it's become a really natural part of my research as well. So I'll turn it over to Tricia, unless you have other questions, because she's going to talk about the cool things. Well, unlike everyone else on the panel, writing is not my most comfortable medium. Talking is. So, what happened for me is I was teaching an on-campus class, and before my students presented these rather large projects that they'd been working on all semester, I would meet with them each for half an hour and go over their projects word by word. And then when I was teaching the class on campus, I had them drop them, and I typed comments out. And I noticed that the revisions didn't necessarily work. It wasn't seeming that they were getting all the information or reading my comments. So then I thought, maybe that's not the most effective mode of communication. So I'm not a real techie person. Once I learn something, I try to find every use for it. So Camtasia, screen capture is like my everything. So what happened was I was meeting with students and going over these projects. So what I decided to do was have them drop their projects, and then I would create a video talking over their projects, highlighting the things they were doing well, addressing the rubric, commenting on what was or wasn't working, where they needed to make adjustments. So when they open up their video, which I just put into YouTube, and they can just click on it in the course, they'll see me talking and explaining what I'm going to do and how I'm going to provide them with feedback, and then they'll listen to the entire project and make edits. Let me show you a little bit of an example. So here's an example of what I do, just part of it.
the standard or specific skills and benchmarks that we're looking for children to demonstrate during their play. So you should write your focus more clearly reflecting specific outcomes we hope for children to demonstrate. The description should be written in an objective manner, and you do use present tense here, and provide a lot of detail regarding Maria's play and her interactions with you, and how through conversation you supported the extension of her understanding of non-standard measurement. Within the description, there seems to be 3 specific ways that she demonstrates an understanding of non-standard units of measurement. First, by using a single unit of a piece of yarn, breaking that piece of yarn down into smaller units, popsicle sticks, and then counting those popsicle sticks.
Okay, so you can kind of see how that's the way I would provide feedback to my students in class, and I wanted to provide the same kind of experience for the students in my online class. What then happened was my on-campus students were taking notes during these meetings, and then they'd come back and say, oh, I forgot what you said about this. Can you please, go over it again? And so then I just started making movies for everybody. And I realized that the quality of the work went way up, where I could also cite specific examples of what they were doing really well and do some analysis that they weren't, couldn't do on their own or weren't yet at that point where they were doing it on their own. So that's one way I use screen capture. The other way I use video is that one of the things that frustrated me the most was I was having students be required to participate in discussions. Does anybody else have discussions in their classes? And then I, typed comments, and I don't know if anyone read them because they were only required to respond to 2 people by a certain time. And once they posted their 2 responses, they were done with that discussion, and they never went back to it. And so I realized that the discussion wasn't necessarily a discussion. So what I did was I would take notes myself on the key points from the discussion, where good points hadn't been expanded upon, where some points, maybe the comments weren't as thoughtful or as critical as I had hoped. And then I made a movie each week. So next week when they opened up the discussion, what they see is a video of me recapping the highlights from the discussion and posing new questions to them. So it forced them, in order to participate in the next discussion, to read my comments and reflections on the discussion that had already occurred from the week before, and help the discussion continue. So one thread for the week was sort of a continuing discussion that had happened each week. It's, of course, expanding upon it based on what we were reading that week. And the other one was more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing that I wanted them to do. I made sure that my discussions were always in small groups, and I would highlight something everyone said each week. So I would say, Karen made a really good point about emergent curriculum this week. I noticed that no one commented on this. Going back to her comment, here are some things I'd like to highlight and want you to think about expanding on based on what we're reading this week. And so it helped them go back and relook at discussions that maybe had kind of dropped off the face of the class, rather than, keeping things going a little bit more. That's how I use video on classes. Yeah?
Do you use Camtasia for that as well?
I do. For me, it's just the easiest thing. So I just sit in front of my laptop, and you have to get past the pauses. I used to try to edit all that out, and then I was like, I'm just a human being who stumbles constantly. And I don't even, once I tape it, I don't even look at it anymore. I just say what I want to say, and just move on.
Can you hear me? I've also used videos for my online class. I use a software program called Jing, which is a free download. It also caps you at 5 minutes, which I found to be incredibly useful. And that was actually the hardest part of getting used to using it, is that I had to train myself to not say as much as I wanted to say, which I think is a good reminder for all kinds of commenting. There's a certain point at which students just shut down anyway, and so I like that limit for myself. So that would be an easy program for you to play with a little bit during the work time if you're interested in using video at all.
Since I'm a librarian, I don't just teach classes. I actually do a lot of just one-on-one help with students with their research. So I use screencasting sometimes because it's easier to show than tell. and I can demonstrate how some sticky thing, they can't see something in a database, they can't see a limiter or something like that, so then I can actually live recreate their search and then highlight where it is that they needed to click something. And it's because the tech support part can get in the way of the actual process of the research. And then I can also go over, like, maybe you could be using different terminology, maybe you need to use a different resource, and then that can be really quick. And we do that from the reference desk a little bit, or within our classes sometimes because they're about research. So that can be really useful. So if you were teaching statistics or something and somebody couldn't figure out SPSS, you could show them really quickly, like, this is where you go. Now you can move on with the process.
What was that course? What did you use?
I use Camtasia. Jing is from the same company as Camtasia. Jing's just the free version. So, but there are other tools. Jing.
So I have to jump into like this screen capture thing. I've experimented with using both audio and video together to respond again to students' written work. I spent a couple of semesters recording podcasts, podcasted comments to all of my students' work, and for me it felt really cumbersome and very repetitive. But I find that that's a very useful tool for early assignment to kind of talk through the kinds of things that you're responding to, and I think then maybe weaning away from that. But I also have found, and I'm more and more convinced, that audio by itself can be really frustrating, and having some visual, at least for me, having something to look at, even if it's static, makes audio more meaningful. So I currently use podcasting for commenting on electronic assignments. So I have a wiki assignment, for example, and it's frequently a group assignment, and I'll use a podcast for that, so that I can actually comment. In a way, it's the equivalent of an inline comment in that I can display what I'm talking about in the video, and I can speak to it specifically, but I'm not actually marking up the text, which is sort of a combination, I think, of what Trish and Tessa are doing. So that there's just tons of potential.
Are there any programs, because I'm just the opposite, words get in the way of me understanding, so listening to it is perfect. But are there any programs that will take what you're saying and then put them in text?
Camtasia has captioning that's terrible.
Yeah.
Automatic captioning is just terrible.
So that's not very good.
YouTube has automatic captioning too, but automatic captioning is a real problem. Dragon? Yeah, Dragon's been around for a while, and it's also, I've been terribly frustrated with it. I've been looking for years for ways to automatically create a transcript of my podcasts so that I can then caption them and I don't have to write a script, because I find that when I write a script, it sounds like I'm reading a script. And if I'm going to write a script, I might as well just write my comments. Because unlike Trish, I have to go back and edit out the, well, that was a really stupid thing to say. I mean, you saw me over there. I talk to myself all the time, and I can't post videos with all of that. And I spend a lot of time cleaning up my podcasts.
I'm different. I'll just put it in server.
Yeah.
Rather than edit stuff. But you can go into Camtasia and add captions after the fact, and it's actually not that fun.
Especially because sometimes you don't need to actually caption everything you said, just the important things. Don't caption the ums. Leave that out. Nobody needs to know that. And I find Dragon to be problematic as well. Voice Assist, which is an app that I just added to my iPad, seems to work a little bit better, but it doesn't integrate with other things. So it's just transcription of voice. So I don't think there's a perfect.
And you think
process.
because with accessibility and being able to do that would be like a real.
I just think the technology for capturing voices isn't there.
Michelle, are you going to talk about that tomorrow?
Yeah, Casey's going to show an example of Dragon, and Kathy will probably talk about it too. Dragon's getting quite a bit better, honestly, but captioning, yes, is still an issue. So we will talk about it, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. And UDSS obviously offers things for students who need specifically text-based materials, but
ideally, we would all have text-based options for all of our, all of our video, all of these things. So it's an issue. But yeah, we'll talk about it. Kathy will talk about it too, right?
The pulse pen from LiveScribe going to be discussed at all?
Casey's going to talk about the smart pen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about a couple of those things tomorrow, some accessibility pieces. Yeah.
How do we download Camtasia?
Is actually a fee-based.
Yeah, Camtasia costs about $30. Is that right? No, it's $100. Yeah, it's $100.
Is it per user? It's $100?
Yeah.
We have to do that on our own. There's not like a campus one.
No, there's no campus license for it.
free, but it's only 5 minutes. It's not.
Oh, really? Yeah. As Meg said, Jing is free. You could try out Jing.
And you can even do things in 5-minute segments. So if you're organized, you think, okay, this is part one, then Jing.
Do you do podcasts through Camtasia? And so you just do 5-minute little segments?
No, I use Camtasia. So sometimes my podcasts are embarrassingly long.
Can you screen capture a PowerPoint? You want to do a PowerPoint
Yes.
through Camtasia?
Yes. And for Jing.
And through Jing, but Jing is this a 5-minute video.
Jillian.
I must be missing something. I mean, I just sit in front of my laptop and point my little camera at myself and flatter for 5 minutes. Save the video, upload to YouTube. Go talk into my. What am I giant thing like this? Am I not using?
Nothing.
Nothing.
That works great.
Okay. Yeah.
I used to use GarageBand, which is a native application for Mac, because I'm a Mac user, when I was doing just audio. And I just used GarageBand, and it was fine. I mean, it was there, and it was fine, and let me do what I wanted to do. iMovie is also a Mac application, and we don't mesh. iMovie and I don't mesh, and that's why I like Camtasia. But if you've got a native app, it's working pretty well.
You say that your videos upload to YouTube. Are there any FERPA concerns?
I'm not talking about individual students. I'm just saying, I'm giving a video lecture about the class and the content for the week.
But if we're talking about the feedback on assignments.
Actually, I didn't see on that. The feedback on student comments, I just see it as an empty profile, and they open it up individually. But like when I explain the rubrics and things like that, those are all up there on YouTube for the whole class.
But my students will they'll send me the link that only comes to me, so it's only observable by me to me.
If you use Jing, it will save to TechSmith, I think is the site, or Screencast. And it's the same way. You can basically send a link that only they can view if they've got that link. And so that's what I've done. It's a file that is actually based on their Word. And if it's a broader one, you can, I think this is true for Camtasia and Jing, you can embed those in eCampus as well if you're using a course shell. So that's a nice way that they don't have to click out to go somewhere else. They can do it right from whatever shell they're using.
The other thing I do is when I'm giving student comments through a video, if I'm posting it on YouTube, I don't include rate and I don't include student names. So I'll refer to them as group so-and-so, maybe using the title, so that I only post, they're the only people who have access to that link. The grade is in a different file, because I always have a rubric too. And that's where their names are identified as well. So there's nothing identifiable on YouTube, or nothing that's traceable to the students themselves.
And I'm just going to jump in really quick and say that we actually will have a session on screencasting and one on audio feedback. So I'm kind of extending on these things. I'm just going to do a video one, and myself and Trisha or Meg. It's like somebody, can't remember who it was. We'll be doing one on audio later in the week too. So just give you some more options.
Thank you all.